This is from the Macquarie Concise, the Australian Standard Dictionary. The words are interesting there because we've got the words ethics and moral. I'll come back to professionalism. But the words ethics and moral came up a lot, almost as if they're exactly the same thing. It's the distinction between right and wrong. Ethics actually said that it's a system of moral principles, judgment of right and wrong, or how do we know what the right thing to do is. When I looked it up on the web, the Princeton WordWeb website is quite a good one, and they in fact had exactly the same words they used to describe ethics as they did to describe morals, which I just find interesting because, and maybe I find things interesting different to the rest of you, but I thought it was interesting because when I talk to people in industry about this, or even some of you I noticed, there's a bit of a cringe that we have in our culture, in our society, about using the word morals, because it's like it's got a bad rep. We're all very ethical, but we don't like being moralistic. I've actually heard people say, it's not my job to teach, when we're talking in a homelessness situation. Oh, no, I don't teach morals. I would never impose my morals on young people. But in the same breath, they're talking about, but we do need to let them know right and wrong. We do need to let them know how to act ethically. So the words, although they've got dictionary definitions virtually identical, there's a cultural issue between ethics and morals. Essentially, they're both saying it's about right and wrong, conduct that's virtuous, principles of right and wrong. I looked at some others. So when I then started saying, okay, really what we want is the code of ethics. Let's look up for a definition of that one. And what I found was that it's a code adopted by a profession or by a government body to regulate that profession, or an organised group of ethical behaviour guidelines that govern the day-to-day activities of a profession or industry. Key words in there, you'll see the word profession coming up. So it's actually about us as workers, adopted by profession. Two different definitions, and the key difference I can see between them is one acknowledges that it's by a profession, one says by profession or by government. And the first one's talking about regulating, whereas the second one's talking about guidelines that govern the day-to-day activity. Nevertheless, we're seeing code of ethics as being what you do in industry. So I want to make that clear. When I'm talking about ethics in this unit, I'm talking morals being your personal, individual-based belief system about what's right and wrong. I'd say ethics are about what the industry says is right and wrong. And we can't always say that it's the same thing. So I threw a couple of questions your direction earlier on in this lesson, and people were very quick to answer about this is what's ethical prior to you looking at the code of ethics. So we just need to be careful. You might think it's morally wrong for somebody to ask a co-worker out on a date, and I might agree with you. And in fact, I think 18 out of 20 people might agree with you. But is that the same as saying that the industry has a standard that says we won't behave that way? Because we want to be governed by what the code of ethics says, what the industry standard is. Otherwise, you might find yourself working in a different workplace one day and they've suddenly got a code of ethics. They've got a personal belief there that you should always wear a tie or always wear certain clothing. And you could sort of say, well, this is agency policy, but is that really what the industry expects of us? And that fits into that discussion around professionalism. So that sort of leads me to this whole question of who helps, how does the industry know, how does the industry come to this agreement? And like, wouldn't it be cool if we knew for sure what was what the industry expected. Wouldn't it be cool if everybody across the industry had sort of come to the room together and had great long discussions about it so that they could actually nut it out and you knew for sure this is what the entire industry says? Because we didn't all agree on any of those questions. And like we did get a lot of majority yeses, but we got a few variations there, and I found when people started talking, they sort of started saying, like some of you were saying yes, but it depends on other stuff. Where do we draw that line? Now, the cool thing is, there is actually a whole bunch of people that do help us do that. How many people here are familiar with the term peak body? So have you heard of the term peak body? Okay. Do you know what it means? That's okay. I will explain. The peak body is like a club that typically services, but also individuals can join, that doesn't actually deliver services. So, Early Childhood Australia is a peak body for childhood services. They don't deliver any early childhood services themselves at all. It's a club that, in this case, early childhood services can join in order to help them out with stuff. So that's what we call the industry peak body. And they also have them for the Medical Association and for the builders and for the Business Council and various others. And they serve a role because they got lots of different roles. They got roles where when government's putting in new policies that affect, I'll keep using the childhood one, when government's putting in new policies about childhood, they would find it incredibly difficult to speak to everybody in the industry. What they will do is speak to the peak body. So I used to be on the board of a peak body for New South Wales Homelessness Services. Every month we would have a meeting where we sat down with the members, and we'd actually often ring them up as well and say, what's your opinion on this new thing the government's got? So that's sort of from the top down, the government asking down. Sometimes we would hear from them and they'd say, here's an issue, can you bring it to the attention of the government? And we would feed that off to the government as well. Or sometimes it wasn't even government. There was an issue with shopping malls, where shopping mall guards were mistreating young people. So that wasn't even involving government, but that was still them hearing from industry. In this case, one of the cool things that they do is they go around and they talk to different people in their service and they say, have we got it right? Is this the code of ethics? And they write the code of ethics, to bring it back to the topic, for the different industries. So the ones on the board are Youth Coalition of the ACT, that's the youth peak body. They regularly talk to the youth industry. Early Childhood Australia, I've mentioned a bit already. ACWA is going to be a key one for us to know about because they're the ones that are for the general community work industry. It's almost like the default welfare service peak body. Unless you're a specialist in mental health peer work, they would have their own code of ethics. Specialist in Aboriginal health work, specialist in youth work, various others. But this is the generic one there. The AASW is on our board too. That's an important one to know about. It's a different peak body. It's the Australian Association of Social Workers. So in Australia, to call yourself a social worker, you have to be eligible to join the AASW. And they will only consider you for membership if you have completed the degree that they've approved of, the 4-year social work bachelor's or the couple of years Masters in Social Work. So I've got a Bachelor of Social Sciences, I've got a Masters in Social Policy, I've got a couple of decades experience. I can't join the AASW because I'm not a social worker, I'm a welfare worker, and there's a difference. People got that? It's a very clear professional body, because it's kind of awkward. People come over from the UK and they say, I want to be accredited as a social worker, and they say, yeah, actually, no, we don't recognise your qual. It's a 3-year, it's just like David's. You can't join. And that's difficult because that's how they identify themselves. That's what they see themselves as. And in fact, the AASW and ACWA they're both welfare workers, but they've actually taken two quite different approaches. One is very much about the unqualified or the lesser qualified people who are doing the lesser paid stuff. That's aqua. I think you'd still need a qualification to join, but it's not as what we call professionalised. It's not, you don't find jobs at this stage that say you need to be eligible to join aqua in order to get this job. It may head down that path at some stage, but that's generally not where they're at. Whereas ASW, they can't, I don't think they can demand that you're actually a member of the ASW, but they can say you need to be eligible to join. You need to be approved by the ASW. And if the ASW finds that you've breached their code of ethics, they can kick you out. So again, they can't actually sack you, but they can say you're no longer eligible to be a member because you haven't been meeting up with our code of ethics. And the boss then says, well, that's up to us, but you're no longer qualified for the job as far as we're concerned. So is that making sense? A couple of different approaches there. There's another approach which is that you'll find in the medical settings for aged care, for doctors. Let's use the extreme example. Doctors is a heavily regulated space. If you breach the code of ethics, then you're no longer approved by the peak body and no hospital will employ you. And that's a good thing. APRA, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Authority, is a government department that's worked with industry to say here's, amongst other things, like they look at qualification, they look at a range of different things, but we're focused on the code of ethics in this case. So, as I said, it used to be called the Institute of Welfare and Community Workers. It's a voluntary membership, but to keep your membership you have to comply with the code, and that will say things like you need to keep your skills up, you need to, various different things. These guys also get to decide whether you can come to Australia as a skilled migrant. They know yes, we'll recognise that qualification from the University of Delhi. No, we won't recognise that qualification from the University of Calcutta, whatever. The Children's Services Code of Ethics from Early Childhood Australia. There's actually one that services join, not individuals. It's voluntary. Sorry, I think individuals can join as well. Services need to comply with their code of ethics and their standards in order to keep their funding. So that's a little bit different to the aqua one. They can't actually say we're cutting your funding off, but you do need to be meeting up to their standards. The Youth Workers Code of Ethics was originally written by YACWA, the West Australian peak body. Howard Sercombe made it his job for several years. That's how he wrote his PhD. That's how he got his doctorate, was to speak to every group of youth workers he could and help and keep the discussion going on what is it that's expected of youth workers. And it's got some subtle but significant differences to the general aqua Community Workers Code of Ethics. It's been adopted by some of the different state bodies, and they're working towards how do we make this a national uniform code of ethics. It's still voluntary. The aged care workers have one as well that's been developed by a whole stack of different, so the federal government actually put it together, but it was a stack of different peak bodies because there's so many involved in aged care work. This is another one that's legally enforced. You need to be keeping up with the aged care worker code of ethics in order to keep your funding and to keep your jobs. So a range of different peak bodies involved in that one, but it's APRA maintained. So the purpose of all those codes is to define exactly what it means to be a professional. If you go to see a nurse, you expect that she's going to keep things confidential, or she's only going to speak to certain people in certain circumstances. And although that might be the individual agency policy, it's also a key part of the code of ethics that nurses won't divulge information to anyone who isn't authorised to do so, as an example. The codes are really good. We need to keep in mind that they reinforce the legal issues, they reinforce the policy, but they do have specific parts all their own as well. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the aqua code of ethics. And just a quick note to online students, I have a separate video of the recording of me talking through the Code of Ethics. Feel free to, if you prefer, just read the paper version, or you can listen to my commentary on it. It's entirely up to you.